Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we are talking about what I recently described as a once-in-a-generation reckoning for the British water industry. Following the publication of the final report from Sir John Cunliffe's Independent Water Commission last summer, and most recently the landmark January 2026 White Paper, A New Vision for Water, the regulatory landscape across the sector is being completely redrawn. To discuss these changes and the implications for the supply chain, I'm joined today by Chris Taylor-Dawson, Senior Director for Major Water Infrastructure at regulator Ofwat, someone who is without question at the heart of this transition. And there is certainly a huge amount for Chris to get across. To start with, Ofwat itself will be reborn via a merger with the Drinking Water Inspectorate and some functions of the Environment Agency and Natural England to create a new single integrated regulator. And there is a huge amount of work to do on the ground following the latest AMP8 price review. Water companies are committed over the next 5 years to at least 30 major infrastructure projects, including perhaps 9 new reservoirs as part of a complex £50 billion plus major projects pipeline. And with Ofwat's recent economic impact of water supply infrastructure report highlighting that continued water scarcity could significantly stifle economic growth, the urgency is certainly growing. Fortunately, Chris is a calm head when it comes to meeting this kind of challenge and brings a wealth of experience from his previous career delivering major projects for national highways. So let's find out more. Chris, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thanks, Anthony. Great to be here.
Well, Chris, let's start by focusing on the challenges of a post-Cunliffe world and the transition to a single regulator. The Cunliffe report recommends the abolition of Ofwat in favour of a single integrated regulator, as I said. How is the organisation managing the internal cultural transition while simultaneously overseeing a record investment period?
Yeah, so thanks, Anthony. So look, we're eagerly awaiting government strategic policy statement, both for England and for Wales, and the transition plan. Those are due to come out the other side of local government elections. And we'll bring some more colour and some more sort of specificity to next steps. But what we recognise is, there is a clear need for improvement, isn't there? There's a reset moment that Cunliffe has called for. And what was really interesting, actually, in terms of major projects and the work that Rapid are doing around the sort of £50 billion pipeline that you were talking about was, broadly, the approach is working. And he encouraged us to continue to deliver and continue to kind of expand.
So just explain what Rapid is, Chris.
So Rapid is the Regulators Alliance. It brings together Ofwat, Environment Agency, Natural England and DWI, created really to ensure and focus on getting these larger water supply schemes sort of through the early stages of the system such that there is a long-term pipeline of water infrastructure investment. And we see, particularly Rapid as somewhat of a kind of practical blueprint for how integrated regulation can work well. That will, I think, help guide us through this transition. But in terms of the team and myself, we're really focused on delivering the needs of infrastructure, working closely with companies around the projects and the programme that you've talked about. And myself and my team, remain very focused on that here and now.
Well, we'll talk a bit more in a minute about Rapid and maybe what comes after Rapid. But one of the phrases that Cunliffe uses is public benefit. And I suppose the question is how this new regulatory regime will work in practice, how it will practically ensure that water companies do, I suppose, lift their gaze to embed new public benefit duties into their business. How do you see that happening?
So if you wind the clock back 10 years, we're really, as an industry, we're really struggling to kind of get any new significant water supply schemes moving. And I think that was a mixture of struggling to get kind of regulatory alignment and get comfortable with the proposals that are being brought forward. You kind of wind the clock forward to now, we've got a programme of 30 odd projects that have that kind of regulatory support and a programme there. Certain schemes are further forward than others, but I think that's a massive, massive step forward, to kind of go from where we were 10 years to go to where we are now. I think the benefit side of it, we are facing a significant shortfall in water supply. The numbers are around 5 billion litres a day by 2055. And that's a mixture of climate change, that's a mixture of population growth, economic development, but also significantly environmental pressures and the need to reduce unsustainable abstraction in certain areas. And that accounts for about half of that shortfall. The programme is built around a number of key drivers, both demand reduction and supply enhancement. The major projects piece, the pipeline, the programme that we talk about is providing that supply investment. So both of those things have got to come together. They're not alternatives, they are essential to supplying and meeting that demand gap.
So when I talked about once in a generation opportunity to transform the water sector, and one of the things we are seeing is the end of self-monitoring, for instance, for sewage spills. I mean, do you see the kind of changes as being that kind of once in a generation opportunity then to transform the sector?
Yes, I do, fundamentally, Anthony. I think I think there's a couple of things. One is, these big projects, these big program of water infrastructure investment inevitably require a degree of trade-off between different expectations and different requirements from different parts of the system. And I think those, Sir John very much talked about trying to internalise those trade-offs within a single regulator, whereas currently they kind of sit across a number of regulators, and those interfaces have traditionally been quite hard to manage. I think, again, sort of pulling it back to Rapid, I think Rapid is trailblazing in that space, but I think the steps forward into an integrated regulator will continue with that piece. And I think that's essential. We haven't built reservoirs, we haven't built water supply infrastructure of this scale in this country for many, many years. The need is very clear. The case is strong. We need to press ahead and get it going, making sure that we can trade those competing requirements and competing expectations in a way that brings pace and energy to delivery is a crucial part of success.
So having got the Cunliffe report setting out 88 recommendations, we then turn that into a white paper, a new vision for water. There's lots of opportunity for change. I mean, from your perspective, what's the biggest single risk to actually turning that great intention into reality?
I think there are a variety of challenges in a big reform program like that. I think pace is one. People are eager for change, but doing this stuff well takes time, takes care, takes deliberation. I think bringing together three entities into a single entity, anybody who's lived through a kind of organisational transition like that will recognise some of the challenges that faces. Keeping our eyes on the prize, the transition's got to make the big difference, hasn't it? It's got to make that kind of shift. And so, given that there will be so much detail, how do you keep your eyes on the strategic opportunity and realise that while managing all of that kind of complexity and that kind of transition? I think those are some of the features.
And from your perspective at Ofwat, does this bringing together to create this new integrated single regulator, does it solve the sort of the piecemeal and disjointed planning the white paper highlights as a past failure?
Yeah, I think it makes some significant steps in that direction. Absolutely, it will internalise, trade-offs between DWI, Environment Agency, Ofwat context. I think it's interesting from a major projects perspective, and I was really struck by the Fingleton review that came out recently on nuclear regulation. Talked about a number of the challenges in sort of how environmental regulation is exercised and happens in this country that affects a whole range of infrastructure projects. And I think that report did an excellent job of putting its finger on some of the challenges and some of the things that need to be different in that space. Is Cunliffe and is this going to resolve those things per se? No, I don't think it is. So I think there's sort of two lines of conversation going on here, Anthony. One is the sort of broader regulatory piece. The second is this change in itself going to do everything that needs to be done to kind of enhance and improve the pace at which big infrastructure can be delivered? I think that's a slightly separate question. It will go a long way towards that. And I think, given that those different organisations currently sit under DEFRA, so Ofwat, DWI, Environment Agency, Natural England, all have a sort of seat under DEFRA's umbrella, I think there's a real opportunity actually through this major projects programme, to push and drive for some of those sort of reforms from a major projects perspective that have resonance across the wider infrastructure programme. But that's not per se what IWC and Cunliffe is about.
Well, I mean, one of the fears perhaps from a major project delivery perspective is that with all this change, all this transition, lots of legislation, that the existing pipeline doesn't lose momentum. Is that something you have to keep a really close eye on?
I think momentum is critical in major projects, Anthony. I think anybody who's worked in that environment, knows how painful delay and pause is. So I completely agree. I think we're in a good place to do that. So a lot of the work that we're doing around how we set up for success in the major project space, the work that we're doing to move to a single integrated sort of gated delivery process from a regulator, and particularly from an Ofwat and Rapid perspective, has longevity into the new organisation. Things that we're looking at around changing the CIPRA regulations to make them more applicable, the things that we're doing to enable DWI to regulate third parties rather than just water companies, all those things I think will add value and add momentum and transcend, the current arrangements and the future arrangements. So, yes.
This is, I suppose, this is about rationalising, it's about simplifying, but it's also about making sure you don't lose those vital teeth that you need to maintain those standards. Let's talk about water resources, because I think you've described it as a twin track approach of managing demand, sorting out leakage, but also building new resources. The economic impact of water supply infrastructure report, which you produced recently, says we're facing this water shortfall in England of between 1.1 billion and 3.1 billion litres a day by the 2050s. I mean, demand and supply management is key. So how do you describe your twin track approach to this problem?
Yeah, I mean, in that very simple term, it's we've got to reduce how much water people use, and everybody has a part to play in that, each of us and everybody who's listening on this podcast. And then we need to increase the amount of capacity within the system. So we talk about the first, that comes from a couple of things. Leakage reduction is a huge part of that demand reduction process. Sector achieved about a 9% reduction in the period 2025, and there's target of a further 17% reduction in the 5-year period that we're in. Ofwat set a target for water companies to halve leakage by 2050. And we've supported the work in this 5-year period with about 1.7 billion of investment to support that, and that includes also rolling out smart meters. So all of that is about kind of helping customers to reduce their consumption, reducing leakage, which is clearly a loss of water from the system. And in the coming months, we're launching a large-scale water efficiency campaign to kind of support people doing that. And we believe that kind of customer awareness and influencing customer behaviour is an integral part of the solution. So that's the kind of demand side piece. And then on the supply side piece, we talked about the 30 projects, Anthony. That's around, in very broad numbers, that's about a £50 billion programme over the next sort of 15 years. And that's enough water to supply about a third of our long-term deficit. So those two things coming together. But it's absolutely not an either or, it is a both.
So, I mean, that 50 billion, obviously there's the 9 new reservoirs we mentioned, but there's also a lot of other infrastructure that sits behind that. But just focusing on reservoirs, we haven't built a new one for over 30 years. And I spoke to Mark Thurston at Anglian Water recently on the podcast about his challenges in Lincolnshire and the Cambridge Fens, where they're trying to build a couple of reservoirs. I mean, is the primary bottleneck of the planning system, or has it been a historical lack of regulatory appetite for these kind of high capex projects?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I mean, I think what I talked about early on, if we wind the clock back 10 years, I think it was a couple of things. It was we struggled to kind of get regulatory alignment and support around these projects. I think that's a mix of kind of regulators having different perspectives. I think, the confidence that we had in maybe proposals, and at that time, maybe we were further behind in terms of metering and demand reduction. So there's always a balance. We know that these big infrastructure projects are going to be expensive and have an impact on customer bills, and therefore perhaps pursuing other options more aggressively in the early days. But, we've got one reservoir that's being built at the moment. So Havant Thicket down in Portsmouth Patch is in construction. But you're right, this is a big step forward for the industry, but it's also a big step into a kind of technical context that we've not been in for many decades.
Yeah. Is it realistic, Chris? I mean, given the pressures and historical failures to build, is 9 reservoirs realistic?
I mean, look, I think it is realistic. When I started at National Highways, we had a capital programme, maybe of 20 projects. It was sort of fairly low turnover. In 2012, when government turned National Highways into Highways England at the time, it was looking at a 3-4-fold increase in capital investment. Capital programme went for sort of 20 projects to 100 and something projects, 113, I think it was. So, we've seen this sort of significant step up in capital programmes. You've seen it in other infrastructure sectors as well. Doesn't make it easy and doesn't mean that we should be naive naive about the challenges that brings. But the ability of this country to kind of deliver quality infrastructure, we've got a huge track record in that space. There's some challenges that make the news a lot, but there's a lot that goes on that's quietly delivered, with real confidence and with real ability.
Yeah. Well, Mark Thurston also talked about the fact that the move towards a compulsory metering was a significant step, and of course the white paper focuses on smart metering. I mean, is that a real game changer, the introduction of technology, compared to the traditional, I suppose, find and fix methods of dealing with leakage?
Look, we've got to exploit all options, haven't we? Is smart metering on its own going to be kind of the silver bullet that solves everything? Absolutely not. Can technology play a role in being more effective in the way that we find and target and reduce leakage? I'm no leakage expert, but intuitively you go, absolutely. And I know companies are sort of committed to that and using the Innovation Fund to find new ways of doing that. The bottom line is we've also got to increase supply capacity as well. Okay,
well, let's talk about that because you've introduced your major water infrastructure programme. You've got 30 large-scale projects slated by the PR24 review for AMP8 2025 to 2030. You say you launched this new programme, which is a gated process to help delivery this year. I mean, how will this process boost delivery performance above that achieved by the previous RAPID programme?
Yeah, so I think it's a continuity of the previous programme, Anthony, rather than something new coming in. This is kind of refinement. This is improvement. RAPID has been in place for a number of years and is very focused on making sure technically and from a regulatory perspective, projects are well set up from the beginning, that we understand the water supply issues, et cetera, as projects mature and start to move towards their planning phases and their procurement phases. That's very much where Ofwat and the major projects team come in. The gated process has been there, but there was a RAPID version and an Ofwat version. We're bringing those together to make it easier for companies to navigate, to make it more coherent. Yeah. So it's not that this programme is new, but I think, I've arrived, Ofwat's investing in capability. We're continuing to recruit and grow the team as our companies. As these projects grow and become more, kind of mature and muscular and move into their sort of development and delivery phases, we need to ensure that within Ofwat we've got the grip, the overview, the confidence that these projects are delivering value for money and delivering on behalf of customers, and that we're getting that right balance. So that's the sort of focus of the team.
Can you just quickly summarise those steps from project inception to planning approval?
Yeah, so the first step is really making sure that we've got the options right and that the leading option is the right option. We sometimes support both a leading option and a reserve option where that is quite finely balanced. The second step is really making sure that that regulatory alignment, are we sure that there are no showstoppers to this project, that it's got the kind of backing that we need. That we're calling that Gate B. Gate C is pre-procurement. So is the commercial model, is the way that we're looking to bring in the investors and the supply chain, the balance of risk and reward within that kind of commercial construct. Are we happy with that before companies press the button and go out to procurement? And then Gate D is we've done the procurement, we've brought the investment on board, we're about to kind of press the button and go into delivery. Are we happy that we're set up for all of that? So people who are familiar with sort of gated processes and other infrastructure, I think all of that will sound pretty familiar to them.
So it's about simplification, but it's also about reducing duplication, I suppose, in practice. But look at your background, Chris. I mean, you joined Ofwat 12 months ago after 12 years steering major projects at the National Highways. I mean, you ended up as Director of Complex Infrastructure, which I imagine makes you well suited for this kind of environment. But, I mean, how do water company projects compare to highways projects in terms of complexity and deliverability?
I think they vary. I mean, the programme's quite broad. You've got projects like the Fens Reservoir and Whitehorse Reservoir that are at the kind of lower Thames crossing end of scale and complexity, and then you've got smaller ones which are more straightforward. I think what is different in this programme compared to the National Highways programme is the way that these projects are funded. So this is all private finance. This is coming in through the SIPA legislation that was the legislation that underpinned the delivery of Thames Tideway, and then DPC, direct procurement for customers, is a way of water companies bringing in external funding. So I think those are different. I think the other thing I would observe is the environmental regulation interfaces between, abstracting water from the environment, understanding water quality, understanding treatment processes, understanding how that water is then brought into the existing water company system and then discharges, etc. I think that environmental stroke water quality, water safety sort of envelope brings a level of complexity in that we probably didn't see in transport. I mean, transport's different in different areas. But I think, we go back to the importance of rapid and bringing together that kind of regulatory alignment. I think that's partly why that regulatory alignment is so important, because of those technical steps of water treatment and water supply.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the fact that it's private money there, and I presume that does have an impact on the kind of assessment of risk, management of risk, and maybe the motivations for spending. Is there a hard truth about major project delivery that the water sector hasn't quite grasped yet then?
It's a hard truth. I mean, I think in infrastructure delivery, there are lots of hard truths. And one of our big challenges is, do we learn them fast enough, So, I think competition, it might be useful just for your listeners just to take a little bit of sort of explain what we mean by competition, because they might be sat there thinking, well, it's all private money, and you put these things out to tender. That clearly there's competition, but specifically what we're wanting to compete in these projects is the finance. So if you kind of, if I may, Anthony, consume a little bit of time just kind of painting a bit of a picture and an analogy. Yeah. So if you think about, let's say we all own a nice big country house that's quite old and it's got various things. We want to build an extension. So we design the extension. And we've got a choice about how we pay for that extension. We could go to the existing mortgage lender, who is, will extend the existing mortgage at a particular interest rate, or we could go to the market and get a new mortgage purely for the extension and see whether we get a better deal on for the extension than we can from our existing provider. And essentially, that's what we're doing with major projects. Rather than them being funded by the weighted average cost of capital that water companies are funding at, we're looking to see if this is quite a bounded asset, it's new, doesn't have all the kind of risk and complexity that might be associated with an existing water company, can we go to the market and can we get a more competitive cost of capital? And a bit like with a mortgage, the cost of repayment is a significant portion of the cost to customers, and that's true in this context as well. So getting that design of the commercial construct right, making that attractive to investors, getting the right balance of risk reward, if that results in a lower cost of borrowing, that's really good news for customers.
Yeah, which is what learnings from the Tybo project, presumably, that you're bringing in there.
Absolutely, completely. Yeah.
You're based in Bedfordshire, slap bang in the middle of the country. What do you do, Chris, to decompress from the stress of water project delivery?
Cool. So I'm off to Scotland on Friday night to go up a couple of hills with a friend of mine that lives in Glasgow. So certainly getting some fresh air and getting up a hill is part of it. Can't do that on a Monday night.
Getting out of your Ofwat jurisdiction, I suppose.
Well, that's true. That too. And then I've got into some woodwork recently, so I can step through the door into the garage and fire up some power tools and make some noise and make some dust, and that's quite
very good.
Keeps you focused so you don't lose a finger.
No, I'll have to ask you, what's your favourite power tool then? Are you a circular saw man or an oscillating tool man?
Well, I splashed out on a I'm not sure, I shouldn't mention the brand, should I? But I splashed out on quite a nice table saw recently, so I'm quite pleased with that. So quite good fun.
I covered that. Anyway, back to the day job. Looking back to the challenges of major water projects, I mean, the recent economic impact report suggests that failing to secure water could really undercut national growth ambitions to the tune of millions and impact highly skilled employment. I mean, how do you see this new programme being used as a tool for, to help the government with its levelling up and economic growth ambitions?
Yeah, I mean, there's huge alignment between this programme and those ambitions. So we know that, government's 1.5 million housing target. You can't build houses if you haven't got the water to provide for them. So there's strong alignment there. The work that KPMG did recently, the report that you're referring to, contributing 40 billion to the economy by 2050, and over 46,000 construction jobs. So I think, we know there's a strong link between infrastructure investment and economic growth, but it's not just, it's not just the additional water. We've got to remember the environmental benefits, and the reductions in water abstraction at sensitive locations to protect habitats and ecology, such as nationally important chalk streams, River Tess, River Itchen, for example, in Southern's area. So I think, strong alignment. And we see huge levels of government support for this programme, real interest, real involvement, which is fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, it is about boosting communities and I suppose making sure they do get benefit from this biodiversity net gain. And you mentioned the direct procurement for customers model of investment, but I'm kind of quite interested in why or how this model inherently is better for customers in terms of delivering that value for money. And going back right to the top, the phrase that Cunliffe uses, delivering that public benefit.
So you're right. Any Ofwat's policy is any project over 200 million TOTEX needs to be competitively tendered and bring in competition. And there are two models to do that: direct procurement for customers and the SIPA model. So how do those bring additional value? So we talked about cost of capital and competing that and therefore having lower costs of borrowing. That's a key component of it. I think the other really, really important aspects of this are these are big, difficult, complex projects, and bringing the best of the capability that can be brought from both investor backgrounds, but also particularly contractor backgrounds to this, bringing that big project delivery expertise, that focus that and discipline that I think is brought about by having these constructs where, they're both financing and delivering the projects. I think that brings real focus. It brings real discipline to delivery that is really, really important, but also creates the opportunity to bring innovation both in construction and in, where these contracts involve long-term operations and maintenance. It brings, creates opportunities for innovation in that space as well.
Because I suppose essentially, as a customer, you're paying for this infrastructure through your bills, or you're paying through your tax, and making that link between the financing of a project and the actual delivery is a crucial. And I suppose it's crucial to make it transparent as well for the public. How much are they paying for that new asset?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at Tideway, I think originally cost estimates for the bill impact of Tideway were in the sort of £70 per year mark. The reality is that that's been significantly lower. It's been kind of down in the 20s. And that's part of the way that things have been designed and delivered, and the commercial constructs, and getting that lower cost of capital. And it's been a hugely successful project.
Going back to the actual delivery of the projects, I mean, one of the key things that is on your agenda, I imagine, is de-risking the delivery challenges. And the sector is, over the next 5 years, it's a huge increase in what it actually needs to deliver. How does the UK supply chain actually find the physical resources to do this work? Is that going to be a particular issue that needs to be resolved? Actually finding enough resources, the people, the design skills to make it happen.
I think it's a challenge, Anthony. I mean, I think you've got two things running in parallel. So you kind of got a big step up in AMP8 investment that is this 5-year period. I think most of these big projects that we're talking about, the 30 projects, the 50 billion, largely construction for those is going to be in future AMPs. We've got to get them through their, consenting and procurement phases, which is predominantly going to be the focus of AMP8. So those two resource demands, A, I think they're to slightly different segments of the market, and B, they don't overlap, but they do compete with other big infrastructure programs that are running in the UK. There's big investment in defence, there's big investment in national grid upgrades. So plus the challenge of reducing construction numbers with the number of people who are set to leave the sector through retirement. So it is a challenge. I think we've seen supply follow demand in that, some great work going on in, I was reading something recently about the number of trainees, the number of people taking formal training qualifications in the construction sector. The challenge, I think, is then finding placements for those people and getting them into the sector. So one of the things about the programme is not just delivering the individual projects, but trying to build market confidence in a sustained programme that allows investment, allows people to make decisions, contractors to take on apprentices, to invest in technology and innovation. So that's a key piece.
Is that what's next after this one?
Exactly. And I think, rather than these projects just being seen as sort of big one-off individual projects, this is a pipeline that has real credibility, has a proven sort of ability to generate investment, to get to market, to get to construction, and to happen. I think that confidence that the market feels, and that's not going to appear overnight. That's a sustained piece of work that collectively we need to achieve.
Yeah, I know that Ofwat's got its innovation fund. I think you've got about £600 million investment fund, which you're using to perhaps de-risk projects, but certainly to bring in new ideas. We talked about the use of technology, perhaps in the kind of demand management. But are there examples of where you see technology, perhaps artificial intelligence or new data digital technology, actually being able to accelerate project delivery or actually transforming the way you are thinking about your projects?
I think there's lots and lots of examples. I mean, I was fortunate to work with Mott MacDonald and Skanska on the A428. I think the way that they brought technology to the design phase, to solving issues such as carbon, the way that technology is changing live data around the productivity piece, enabling better performance in construction, stronger grip of cost, and particularly within the design phase, which I think is a bit of an Achilles heel for the sector, actually, that costs spin out of control during outline design and main works design. The way that you can use technology in helping the public engage with schemes as they're brought through the development phase. COVID drove us to much more kind of online interaction with customers, enabling customers to kind of have information that was relevant to them for the location that they lived at. So there's lots and lots of examples. It is a challenge for the sector. Agriculture is outperforming construction sector in terms of sort of productivity gains. So there's lots of good work going on, trying to really make it land and make it embed in each of these projects is quite a challenge.
And I imagine you've also got one eye constantly on inflationary pressures because they can very quickly eat up your budgets.
Absolutely. And hard to control. Hard for the sector to control.
Yeah. Well, finally, just, I suppose, looking a bit forward, Chris, I mean, if we were to sit here in 2030 at the end of the AMP8 process, I mean, what's the one metric that will tell you that this new MWIP program has been a success? I mean, is it just about projects actually being underway, or is there something more? Is there something more about sort of a massive cultural change in the industry?
So I think it's more. I mean, I think ultimately we always get judged on performance, don't we? Are the projects being delivered? Are they value for money? Are they getting through their planning phases, of procurement phases, and getting to ground? Ultimately, we've got to deliver the additional capacity that we've committed to deliver. So that's always got to be a kind of eyes on the prize, delivery focused, outcome focused. I think certainly my ambition between now and the end of AMP8 is to kind of very much have moved from that kind of one-off single project, the next one feels different, into here is a sort of sustained program that feels predictable from an investor's perspective, well understood in terms of risk reward balances for the supply chain, and therefore attractive and generating competition, which is good for customers, and building confidence through delivery. It's so important that we talked about momentum earlier, didn't we, Anthony? And that momentum builds stakeholder confidence, that performance builds stakeholder confidence. So I think those are key elements as well.
Yeah. Well, it's in the name of a major water infrastructure program. It's not about projects. It's about an overarching program. The water sector certainly is going to be looking at some change over that period. I mean, for you personally, what will good look like for a new integrated regulator?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I think more than just the integrated regulator, because it is a system of regulators and companies and supply chain working together. I think what I really learned through my time at National Highways is capability is crucial. You've got to have the right teams, the right expertise in place, and it's great to see the investments that companies have been making, and regulators and DEFRA to do that. I think that needs to continue, but it's really encouraging to see. So that's important. I think also nobody can deliver these projects alone. The companies can't do it without the support of the regulators and without the support of investors and supply chains. So creating an environment that gets the best out of each other, that is focused on collaboration, is focused on delivery, I think that is so important and often underestimated. About how much energy and personal leadership and commitment that is required to create that environment. And if you get it right, the difference it makes is phenomenal. If you don't, it can really hamper performance and delivery.
Well, I was at the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation's annual conference, and certainly the feeling was that the strategic road network on national highways is in pretty good shape. I suppose largely imagine to do the hard work of people like yourselves. I suppose the question: do you miss it? Do you wish you were back there?
No. I mean, look, right time for me to move on. I enjoy. I'm absolutely loving the challenge of the water sector. It gets me out of bed every morning. It's not easy, but it's a phenomenal, worthwhile, and valuable part of the UK's infrastructure that is so essential. We rely on it every day, don't we? And what an opportunity to make a difference and to be a programme that people talk about and reference, and a trailblazer in this sort of sector as well.
Well, Chris, thanks so much. It's really interesting set of challenges facing the sector over the next 5 years, and some pretty, and beyond, of course, some pretty fundamental changes happening at Ofwat right now. Certainly, I think everyone's going to be keeping an eye on what you're up to there. So thanks so much for joining me today on the Infrastructure Podcast to give us an update.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, great to speak to you. Great to see you again. And great to see you again so fired up and enthusiastic as well for the challenges ahead. But sadly, that's all we have time for on the podcast right now. But there is more in the pipeline as we continue to probe the big issues facing the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Chris, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.